Flight attendant argued with a rude passenger. He secretly was her billionaire boss. Nicola Hayes saw him as just another entitled passenger who acted like he owned the plane. The irony, he actually did. And that day, he wasn't there by accident. He was there for her. What she didn't know was that this man was about to turn her whole world upside down. Welcome to Stories That See You, where every story finds its voice. If you enjoy this kind of deep, emotional storytelling, please don't forget to rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps me grow and tells me which stories speak to you the most. Thank you. The seatbelt sign dinged to life just as the cabin gave a soft jolt. Walking the business class aisle with steady, practiced steps, Nicola Hayes didn't flinch. She had done this 100 times. Third row, left side, that's where she spotted him. The man was reclined in his seat, eyes fixed on the bright screen of his phone. His fingers moved lazily across the glass, completely unfazed by the turbulence warning. While other passengers tightened their belts or looked around nervously, this one, he didn't even blink. In the VIP section, ignoring a direct safety alert wasn't just careless, it was defiant, and the way he glanced at her, calm and half-smiling, like he knew exactly what he was doing, that made it worse. Like he wasn't just breaking a rule, he was enjoying it. At that moment, Nicola had no idea who he was, but the man was exactly where he wanted to be, and that was the whole point. Nicola placed a polite yet measured smile at the corner of her lips. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn off your device, and please fasten your seatbelt. We've begun our descent." The man didn't lift his head, just his eyes. There was a quiet challenge in that look, a silent, "Impress me first." "My seatbelt," he said, voice calm, almost amused. "Seems to be having a moment. Won't click." He finally glanced at his watch, as if weighing her authority against the ticking seconds. "As for the phone..." He gave her the barest shrug. "Still got 9 minutes left." Nicola didn't flinch. She didn't drop the smile either. Instead, she leaned in, just slightly, letting her shadow fall across the tray beside his seat. One hand rested on the armrest. The other reached for the seatbelt. With a sharp click, she locked it in place. "This is my cabin, sir, and in my cabin, the rules are followed." The corner of his mouth twitched, not a warm smile, not even close, more like the satisfaction of surrendering on his terms. Slowly, he powered down his phone and leaned back, head settling against the headrest, but his eyes didn't close. They studied her, the way she stood, the way her shoulders stayed firm, the way her gaze didn't break, like he was taking notes. A beat of silence. Then the cabin jolted hard. Ice cubes clinked violently inside a glass. A sharp gasp. Second row. An older passenger clutched his chest. Nicola moved instantly, instinct taking over. But before she could reach the overhead panel, the man in 3A was already on his feet. Without a word, he knelt by the emergency kit, unzipped it with practiced ease, and pulled out an oxygen mask and a blood pressure monitor. He handed them to Nicola. "You're going to need these." His voice wasn't calm in the usual polite business class way. It was clipped, precise, like a command given in a cockpit. As Nicola checked the elderly passenger's pulse, she noticed him, still standing, still watching her. His eyes were cold but sharply focused, almost clinical. "Sir, are you a doctor?" she asked without looking up. "No," he replied, his tone edged with something almost smug. "Just thought I'd make your job easier." She straightened. "If you're not a doctor, please take your seat, sir. This is my job." As she passed his row on her way back, Nicola cast one more glance in his direction. He was turning a crystal glass slowly between his fingers. His eyes were fixed on the clouds outside, grey and endless, and somehow, in the way he sat, in the tilt of his head, and the quiet stillness of his posture, he looked like he owned the sky. Nicola had just turned around and was making her way back to her seat when a voice rose from behind her, smooth but unmistakably deliberate. "Could I get a glass of champagne?" the man asked, pausing for just a moment before adding, "And if possible, I'd prefer if you brought it." She stopped in her tracks and turned to face him, locking eyes with the same composed stare she had maintained since the beginning. Her smile remained intact, perfectly professional, but her voice this time carried a firmer undertone. "I understand your request, sir. But as you know, business-class service doesn't include risking everyone's safety for one more drink. No service is possible during landing." The man leaned back in his seat, a low laugh slipping past his lips. He twirled the crystal glass between his fingers, the golden liquid catching the cabin lights. His eyes never left hers. As the plane began its descent, Nicola took a glance at the VIP passenger list resting near the service panel. Her eyes landed on the third-row seat. The name was printed clearly, Robert Cooper. She stared at it for a second, then breathed out through her nose, her thoughts cutting through the sterile calm of the cabin. Who is this arrogant man, she wondered, thinks he owns the entire aircraft just because he's got money? As the plane rolled to the gate and passengers began gathering their things, Robert Cooper stood, phone still in hand. Passing Nicola, he leaned in just enough for only her to hear. "Not often I see someone follow every rule to the letter and still look good doing it." It wasn't quite a compliment, it was a jab, sharp and deliberate. Nicola's practiced smile didn't slip, but her pulse did quicken. By the time he walked off without looking back, she already hated the way curiosity had crept in beside her irritation. His cologne lingered in the narrow aisle, subtle yet insistent, the kind of scent that stayed long after the man was gone. That evening in the narrow kitchen of her apartment, the metallic tick of the kettle echoed off the tiled walls. Nicola set her teacup down on the counter and felt a soft wave of fatigue roll through her shoulders. She dropped her bag on the table and unzipped it. Reaching inside, she carefully removed the golden wing pin from her uniform and placed it in a small wooden jewelry box. At the bottom of the box sat something she hadn't touched in years. A black velvet pouch. With her fingertips, she drew it out and loosened the string. Inside was a worn but sturdy pilot headset. The tiny scratch on the microphone, nearly invisible to anyone else, told a story only she could hear. Holding it in her hands, she felt time slide backward. The white shirt, the thrill of her first flight lesson, the wind tangled with engine noise, and the letter, the one that said she had made it, she had earned the scholarship. She swallowed hard. A familiar sting rose behind her eyes. That dream, the one that began with so much hope, had quietly unraveled the day her father lost everything, and the cockpit she had once imagined herself in was left behind in a hangar, not broken, just unfinished. She returned the headset to its pouch and closed it gently, then leaned on the edge of the table and took a long, steady breath. Every time she let her mind drift back, the same question came like an echo. If I hadn't let go, where would I be now? She never had an answer, but something about today's flight, something in the way the man in seat 3A had looked at her, had pulled that question back into the light. And that unsettled her. At the morning flight assignment meeting, Nicola's eyes paused on the schedule just for a second, and one brow lifted almost imperceptibly. Her name was no longer listed under the London route. "You've been reassigned," the lead flight attendant said, handing her a folder. "Private charter, Dubai. Request came straight from corporate." Nicola accepted the file but hesitated for a beat, her tone even, but edged with quiet disbelief. "I didn't pack for Dubai. I thought I was on the London rotation. I don't even have a spare uniform with me." As she signed off on the paperwork, her supervisor's voice softened. Not quite a warning, but close. "The passenger is someone tied directly to the owner of the airline. They're expecting precision, Nicola. She didn't know the owner of the airline, had never seen his face, but everyone knew the name. George Vance. A figure rarely seen in public, almost always mentioned in the media alongside his sister, Amelia. In Nicola's mind, if anyone was likely to appear on a high-level corporate flight, it would be Amelia. That made more sense. In the pre-flight prep room, Nicola adjusted the clip in her hair and straightened the collar of her uniform. The silence of the room wrapped around her like static. A pause before performance. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror, held her gaze for a moment and whispered softly to herself, "You've got this, girl. Just another flight." The VIP jet sat waiting on the tarmac, sleek and silent. A thin layer of morning clouds filtered the light, turning the aircraft's polished metal surface into a mirror of pale silver, bright but cold. Nicola stood tall at the top of the stairs, hands clasped neatly in front of her, posture perfect. The air around her was still, charged with the quiet weight of formality. In the distance, a dark navy sedan approached, its quiet engine breaking the ramp's early morning silence. Nicola followed its slow stop with her eyes, steady and expectant. In her mind, there was only one possibility: Amelia Vance. She pictured the polished smile from magazine covers, the effortless fashion, the understated but unmistakably expensive jewelry. But the person who stepped out of the car was not Amelia. The man who stepped out of the car was tall, dressed in a crisp sport blazer and light, perfectly tailored trousers that moved like water with each step. Sunglasses masked his eyes, but there was no mistaking the confidence in his walk, the kind that didn't ask for attention, but took it anyway. His sun-kissed hair, a shade of warm, dark ash blonde, fell slightly over his forehead, catching the light as it fluttered gently in the breeze. Nicola blinked, her thoughts stalling for a second. No way! Could that actually be George Vance? The George Vance, the man with no public photos, no interviews, no real face attached to his name? Tomorrow, she might finally have a story worth telling. I saw him, girls. The mysterious George Vance, in the flesh. She could already hear herself saying it. From the way he walked, total confidence, kinda arrogant, honestly. As the man climbed the stairs slowly, he lifted his face toward Nicola. Nicola squinted, looking again, 3 steps away, and she was hit with a wave of shock. Oh God, isn't that him? From the other flight, the arrogant, handsome one. Wasn't his name Robert? The passenger she'd argued with in business class 3 days ago, the one listed as Robert Cooper on the flight manifest, was now walking toward her in steady, deliberate steps. When he stopped right in front of her, he slowly removed his sunglasses and slid them up onto his head. What was this man doing here? What did he have to do with the Vance family? Nicola's eyes showed her confusion, and the man had definitely noticed. Her heartbeat picked up for a moment in the morning chill, but not a single muscle moved on her face. At the corner of his lips, that familiar half-smile appeared. "So, our flight attendant who enforces every rule with precision is here too," he said, his voice low but clear. "Let's see if that same discipline applies on my aircraft." Nicola didn't lose her smile. "Rules don't change based on the aircraft, Mr. George Vance," he replied, with that same signature arrogance. "We met the other day, didn't we?" Nicola bit her lip gently. "Oh, Nicola, did you just argue with your boss on that flight?" She tried not to let it show. "Yes, sir. But even if I had known you were George Vance, I believe the argument would have gone exactly the same." George ran his tongue lightly across his lips, that same faint smile still resting at the corners of his mouth. He gave a small nod. "That's exactly why I asked for you, Nicole." Without taking his eyes off her, he started walking down the aisle, speaking as he moved. "I do hope the champagne is properly chilled." The jet moved silently above a band of clouds. Nicola was alone in the narrow galley. She lined up the cups and started the machine. The metal frame gave a soft groan, and the smell of espresso slowly filled the cabin. Footsteps, even with her back turned, she knew exactly who it was. George stopped beside her, shoulder to shoulder. The tight space of the galley framed them both. "Coffee," he said. Without turning her head, Nicola replied, "How do you take it, Mr. Vance?" "Black." She gripped the cup and pressed the shot button. As the thin layer of creamer began to rise, George stepped closer to the counter, the seam of his jacket sleeve nearly brushing her elbow. "You didn't have to come all the way here, Mr. Vance. I could have brought it to you," she said. "I felt like moving my legs," George replied, standing almost directly behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence at the nape of her neck. Nicola could smell him. Clean, like fresh soap and something expensive. And though she didn't turn around, she was fully aware of every movement he made behind her. And it thrilled her. She noticed her fingers trembling slightly. "Nicola, come on. You've done this 10,000 times. It's just a cocky man. He's testing you. You can handle this." With the cup in hand, she turned and found herself face to face with George Vance, his sharp green eyes fixed directly on her. She tried to smile just a little. "Here you go, your coffee." At that moment, the plane gave a light tremor. "Oh!" Nicola grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself, the cup still firmly in her hand. They both let out a quiet laugh, but then came a second jolt, this time much stronger. The cup flew straight from Nicola's hand, spilling its contents all over George. At the same time, she lost her balance. Despite the hot coffee on his shirt, George instinctively reached out to catch her, but in the next instant, they were both on the floor. George had held onto her tightly as they fell, taking the impact on his own back. When the turbulence stopped, he was lying flat, soaked in coffee, and Nicola was on top of him, her hands frozen against his chest. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Nicola said, her eyes wide with shock. George was remarkably calm. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," Nicola replied, still sprawled over him. "But I think I burned you." "Yes, I think you did," George said, that same half-smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If you could get off me, I might be able to check how bad." "Oh, God, of course," Nicola said, scrambling to get off him. In her rush, she might have touched a few unfortunate places. Her face turned bright red. Once she was on her feet, she quickly tried to straighten her uniform, smoothing it down with shaky hands. Meanwhile, George was already unbuttoning his shirt. When he pulled it open, a red burn was clearly visible on his pale chest. Nicola's panic spiked. "Oh no, that looks bad." George tilted his head slightly and smiled. "It's nothing, though. You're not looking so great yourself. I mean the redness. Not that I'm complaining about the view." Nicola blinked, confused, then looked down and froze. The top 4 buttons of her blouse were gone. She hurried to cover herself with her hands. "Oh!" The edge of her black lace bra was slightly visible, and her skin, like his, was marked by spilled coffee and a spreading flush of red. "Guess we're both hit in the same spot," George said, with a laugh. "We need ice," Nicola replied quickly, already turning to the service cabinet. But her mind wouldn't let up. 5 years in this company, and the first time I meet the owner, I burn him with coffee, flash my bra, and it's not even been 20 minutes. God, how does someone like me, with actual discipline, end up in a moment like this? Nicola pulled 2 packs of ice from the freezer compartment. It was already sweating in her hands, the cold sinking in fast. "Stay calm, Nicola. This is just protocol. You've done this before. It's basic first aid." When she turned around, George was standing right in front of her. Shirt completely unbuttoned, half undressed. She swallowed. His chest was lean, defined, and gleaming slightly under the cabin lights. The white fabric hung open, framing the fresh red mark on his skin. She tried to keep her eyes locked on his, but George wasn't looking at the ice pack. He was looking straight at her. "Come here," he said, voice low, steady. "You do it." Nicola stepped closer, gripping the ice pack with both hands as she pressed it against the burn. The mix of heat from his skin and cold from the ice sent a subtle current up from her palms to her shoulders. "Harder," George said, a trace of amusement in his voice. Nicola swallowed. "Pressing too hard on a burn might not be the best idea, Mr. Vance." George tilted his head slightly, then reached out and touched the red mark beneath her open blouse. Nicola flinched, part surprise, part pain. A small smirk appeared on his lips. He leaned closer, voice low. "What about yours?" "Mine?" Nicola asked, eyes still lowered. "You're burned too." He picked up a second ice pack, and without asking, slid it through the open space between her missing buttons, pressing it directly to her skin. Nicola's breath caught. The moment the cold touched her skin, her shoulders gave a slight involuntary shiver. "Mr. Vance, that's really not necessary." George leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I think it is. Pain feels less intense. When someone else applies the treatment, it's a professional fact." Nicola's voice came out strained. "And in what field exactly is that considered professional?" "Military," George replied, sliding the ice pack slightly lower. "I think that's enough. For both of us, Mr. Vance," Nicola said, pulling her hand back from his chest. "We might have an antiseptic cream. I'll go look for it." George stayed where he was, ice pack in hand, smiling as he watched her hurry away. Nicola's heart was pounding so hard she could almost hear it in her ears. 12 more hours to go. What the hell am I supposed to do now? By the second hour of the flight, the cabin lights had dimmed and the sky outside had deepened to a dark blue. Nicola was in the galley, collecting cups after service. Her blouse was still slightly open where the buttons had popped. With every step, the fabric shifted, and the movement made her uneasy. The sound behind her wasn't footsteps this time. "Why did you leave flight school, Nicola?" She set the cups down on the counter and turned her head. George was standing in the middle of the cabin, watching her closely. How do you know about that?" "It wasn't hard to find. Scholarship, training, not for me." Nicola pressed her lips together. "It's personal." George tilted his head slightly. "Well, luckily for us, we've got time." Then his eyes dropped briefly to her blouse. Despite the small safety pin she'd used to keep it closed, the opening was still visible, and hard to miss, even with her composed posture. "You're not moving very comfortably," he said, nodding toward her front. Nicola flushed. "Sorry, Mr. Vance, I didn't pack a spare uniform." George didn't say a word as he walked toward the back. A few minutes later, Nicola saw him return from the small cabin bedroom, holding a black dress, deep V-neck, short. "Put this on." "Mr. Vance, I'm your flight attendant. My uniform—" "I don't need the uniform to know that," George cut in. "Do you see any other passengers on this plane, Miss Hayes?" Nicola looked away. "No." "Then, since you're my flight attendant, I'm giving you a direct order. Wear it, please." Nicola took the dress, holding it delicately by the edge of the fabric. "This is what you want me to wear?" George shrugged. "It's Amelia's taste, sorry. If you prefer, I can grab the red one. High slit, low back." A smirk played on his lips. Nicola tried to meet his gaze without flinching. "I think the black one will cause fewer problems." "There you go." George gave a small nod. Nicola took the dress and walked into the small bedroom, her heart picking up speed. She closed the door behind her and let out a long breath. She knew exactly how strange this situation was. George Vance, the mysterious man behind the curtain, now suddenly just a man. A very attractive one. "Not even in my wildest dreams," she thought. As she adjusted the hem of the dress, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Her hand moved to the clip holding her bun. She paused for a few seconds, then let it be. "I already look like I'm heading to a nightclub in this thing. The least I can do is keep my hair up." When Nicola stepped out into the corridor, the first thing she saw was George taking off his shirt. He had a white t-shirt in one hand, still on the hanger. Her eyes drifted to the burn on his chest, bright red, raw, like exposed flesh. As she moved closer, she noticed it had started to blister slightly. Then her gaze dropped just a little lower. For a split second, something caught her eye. A small tattoo just below his left rib. Fine black lines. A string of letters and numbers, like latitude and longitude. "Let me take a look at your burn, Mr. Vance," Nicola said softly. Her slender fingers hovered just above the injured skin, not quite touching it. "You should apply more cream. The ice didn't stop the blistering. Looks like your skin's more sensitive than I thought." George said nothing, just watched her in silence, a faint smile forming as he did. "The dress suits you, Nicola." She looked down for a moment, shy. "Thank you." "And what about yours?" he asked, his voice calm, unaffected, the opposite of her tension. Without waiting, George reached out and placed his fingers gently on the red skin just below her collarbone. Nicola pulled back slightly. "It hurts when you touch it. Other than that, I'm fine." A moment later, she was standing next to George, who was now seated comfortably in his chair. Shirtless. She held out the cream. George narrowed his eyes. "What did I say helps it heal faster, Nicola? If you don't mind, could you apply it?" Nicola gave a tense smile. She took a small amount of ointment on her fingertips and in a few quiet seconds gently spread it over the burn. She had to lean in. She didn't look at his eyes, but she was certain his were on her. She finished quickly and stepped back, but George stopped her. "Wait a second." He took a small bit of cream from the edge of the tube still in her hand, then looked at her. When Nicola didn't lean in, he stood up with a quiet laugh. Without asking, he began gently rubbing the cream into the burn on her skin. God, this man has no concept of boundaries, Nicola thought. Does he think the crew, along with the jet, belongs to him too? Nicola kept her expression steady. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. That wasn't really necessary." As George settled comfortably into his seat, he said, "Sit with me for a bit, Nicola. I thought you were going to sleep. I'd rather talk. Would you mind sitting across from me?" He lifted a hand, gesturing toward the seat across from him. "Of course," Nicola replied, still trying to hold on to her role, still trying to be the flight attendant. "I'm never working another private jet flight again," she thought. Nicola slowly sat down in the seat directly across from George, just at the edge. Her hands rested, folded neatly on her knees, her posture perfectly straight as she looked at him. George, pulling on his t-shirt, kept his eyes on her the entire time. He sank deeper into his chair, letting it hold his full weight, never breaking eye contact. They stared at each other for several seconds. Then Nicola's eyes shifted toward the aisle. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do, what she was supposed to say, what exactly they were supposed to talk about. All she knew was, if she didn't break the silence soon, she wasn't sure how much longer she could sit still under the weight of that gaze. "Were you in Afghanistan?" she asked suddenly. George's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, that's interesting. How'd you figure that out?" "Your tattoo. Coordinates, right? Pilots who've seen combat, they tend to get marks like that." The corner of George's mouth lifted. "You're sharp, Nicola. As sharp as you are beautiful." "What? Did you date a military pilot or something?" "No," Nicola said, trying not to smile. "I just read a lot." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you lose someone close to you, Mr. Vance? In the war?" George didn't answer. He just gave a faint smile and nodded once. "Tell me why you dropped out of flight school," George said. Nicola took a deep breath. "I needed money." "You had a scholarship, why?" "My father went bankrupt. Debts. Someone had to work. Someone had to bring in money right away. George nodded slowly. That's incredibly selfless. I don't see it as selfless. They're my family. We take care of each other. I did what I had to do. George looked at her more closely now. But you gave up your dream. You loved flying. You wanted to be a pilot. Nicola's eyes began to sting. Life is what happens while we're busy making plans. Then she looked at him, startled. Wait, how do you even know I wanted to be a pilot? This time Nicola asked, why you? Your family was wealthy. You had an airline. Why become a combat pilot? George let out a quiet laugh. I was young, angry, rebellious. I wanted to be free, and family stuff. I'm not as selfless as you are. Nicola glanced at the tattoo and spoke softly. Still, you got that inked on you, so something about it must have meant a lot. George stood, never taking his eyes off her. We'll have dinner together tonight, Nicola. I've got a private meeting in Dubai with some partners. I want you there with me. He stretched a little. I'll catch a nap in my room. Wake me in 2 hours? Of course, Nicola said, rising to her feet. The cabin was dim, bathed in soft, low light. The deep hum of the engines filled the space like a rhythmic lullaby. Nicola sat in one of the front seats, hands clasped in her lap. She was trying not to close her eyes, but the same question kept circling in the back of her mind. Why is this man so interested in me? And why does he keep pushing my boundaries every chance he gets? Her eyelids grew heavy. Somewhere deep down, she had already admitted it. There was something about George, something irritating, but undeniably magnetic. Without realizing it, she leaned her head against the seatback. The hum of the engines washed over her like waves. She woke with a quiet, uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. And when her eyes opened and focused on her watch, a sharp wave of panic passed through her. She was supposed to wake him, and 2.5 hours had already gone by. She stood up quickly and walked toward the door of George's cabin, knocking once, gently, cautiously, and waited, listening for the slightest movement. Nothing. She tried again, this time with a bit more firmness, but still the silence on the other side held. With a breath of hesitation, she reached for the handle, telling herself it was just a check, just to be sure. She eased the door open. Inside, the room was softly lit by the ambient glow from the window. George was asleep, turned onto his side, dressed in a plain white t-shirt and dark boxers, his chest rising and falling in the slow, even rhythm of deep sleep. His hair was a mess, pushed back carelessly, and the calm on his face made him look impossibly younger. Nicola stayed near the door at first and called out his name. Quiet, careful, Mr. Vance. No reaction. She stepped closer, said it again, just a little louder, still nothing. Her pulse picked up. Something about the stillness made her uneasy. She reached the side of the bed and, after a beat of hesitation, reached down and lightly touched his arm. It happened all at once, like a storm breaking loose. George's eyes were still half closed, not fully awake, but his reflexes were razor-sharp. In one swift motion, his hand snapped around her wrist, not with his fingers, but with the full grip of his palm, firm and unyielding. His face had tensed, every muscle drawn tight, and from between his lips came a name, not shouted, not even spoken clearly, but breathed out with a sharp, haunted edge. Lana! Nicola blinked. Lana? Mr. Vance, it's Nicola, she said softly, keeping her voice low, calm, trying not to startle him more. But he didn't let go. His fingers stayed locked around her wrist, still tight, still holding. Nicola eased herself onto the edge of the bed, careful not to startle him further. It's okay. You're on your jet. We're headed to Dubai. Everything's fine. George's breathing was uneven, shallow, like he was still trapped in whatever nightmare had pulled him under. Slowly, he pushed himself upright. And then, to her surprise, let his head fall gently against her shoulder. Nicola's shoulders tensed on instinct. She froze, unsure of what to do. But then, without fully meaning to, her fingers found their way into his hair, brushing through it gently. "You're all right. Must have been a nightmare." "I'm here," she whispered. George lifted his head. His green eyes locked onto hers, close enough that she could feel his breath. For a moment, it looked like he was about to kiss her. He leaned in just slightly, then stopped, pulled back. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "When someone touches me in my sleep, I don't always react well." Nicola's heart was pounding against her ribs. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His fingers finally loosened their grip around her wrist, slowly, without a word. George stood up. "I need a shower." Nicola rose from the edge of the bed a bit too quickly, only then noticing the slight tremble in her knees. "If you need anything, I'll be right outside." She turned and walked to the door, her posture composed, or at least she hoped it looked that way. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, she leaned her back against it. Her breath was shallow, her palms warm and damp. God, how many more hours do I have left with this man? The cabin was dim, lit by the soft glow of overhead lights that cast a warm tone over the cream-colored leather seats. In the galley, Nicola lined up the coffee cups, the hiss of steam rising from the machine filling the quiet. Drops of espresso shimmered on the metal surface, vibrating slightly with the hum of the jet. Footsteps behind her. Then a pause, too brief to notice, but just long enough to feel. She sensed him before he spoke, a presence just over her shoulder. She turned. George was no longer the man she'd seen slouched in that dim bedroom. His hair was slicked back, his shoulders squared inside a sharp navy suit, the subtle cloud of cologne around him clean and commanding. She knew that scent instantly, deep, crisp, and unmistakably deliberate. The top button of his shirt was undone, his collar slightly relaxed, giving him a look that was polished but effortless. Nicola gripped the cup in her hand a little tighter. When he stepped closer, the swirl of coffee steam between them made her breath catch. "I hope I didn't startle you." "Back in the room," George said, his voice low but steady. Nicola gave a small nod. "No." But the cup in her hands trembled just slightly. She held his gaze and managed a smile. "I'd say you shouldn't get that close when I'm holding hot coffee, Mr. Vance." The corner of his mouth curved, that familiar, knowing smirk. "Where's the thrill in playing it safe?" Then, without even glancing at the cup, "Get one for yourself too, and come sit with me." Nicola's fingers loosened slightly as she set the coffee cup down on the counter. Why is he always so commanding? The thought passed through her mind, uninvited. By the time she looked up, George was already heading toward the VIP section of the cabin. By the time the jet touched down on the private apron of Dubai International Airport, the sun was beginning to set. The heat shimmered across the tarmac, blurring the horizon in soft waves. The terminal's glass facade glowed in gold, casting flickers of light across the jet's polished surface. When the door opened, George descended the stairs without breaking stride. He moved quickly toward a waiting black sedan, flanked by his reception team. Someone held the door open for him. Just before getting in, he turned his head briefly, but his eyes never met Nicola's. The man who had lounged barefoot on the jet, flirtatious and disarming, was gone. In his place stood someone entirely different, cool, composed, untouchable, a businessman with no loose ends. Nicola realized she'd been standing still longer than necessary. Jet Captain Henry approached with an easy smile. "How was the flight, Nicola?" "Didn't get a chance to talk up there. Come on, our car's over this way." "Henry," she said with a faint smile, "we missed you." "So, you're flying for the Vances now?" "Been what, 3 years?" Henry had been one of the first captains she'd ever flown with, back when she started as a cabin attendant. Warm, grounded, like the kind of father figure you don't realize you need until you're 35,000 feet in the air. They'd shared plenty of long-haul flights, late nights, and cramped crew lounges. Now, in the back seat together, the car slipped off the airport road and into the golden blur of the city. Through the tinted glass, Nicola spotted the Burj Khalifa gleaming in the distance. Palm trees flanked the road like painted lines. Luxury storefronts sparkled like diamonds under the last light of the sun. 3 years, Henry said, nodding. Amelia Vance personally requested me, left the fleet, became one of their 2 private pilots. Nicola smiled, eyes still on the city lights. I guess that counts as a promotion. She shifted in her seat. Yesterday was actually the first time I ever met one of the Vances. I didn't even know I was assigned to a private flight until the very last minute. Henry chuckled. So he specifically asked for you, or did he just happen to catch you during a surprise crew test? Nicola turned to him, caught off guard. Wait, how do you know about that? George Vance has been doing it for 2 years now. Boards flights under fake names, checks how the staff handles pressure. He thinks no one notices, but those of us in the cockpit, well, we hear things. Nicola gave a short laugh. I wouldn't say I caught his eye, more like I got under his skin. Nicola asked, Henry, George Vance, you've been flying with him for 3 years now. What's he like? Henry chuckled. George Vance, he's solid, doesn't care for crowds or attention, keeps his private life very private, bit intense at times, big on discipline, but he's a good man. He paused, then added, he and Amelia? Total opposites. She's assertive, hands-on, definitely a people person, but to be fair, I've never seen her treat the crew badly, not once. Nicola turned her gaze from the city back to him. So, George Vance is a good guy, huh? She said with a hint of sarcasm. Didn't exactly feel like that at certain moments on the jet. Henry laughed. Don't let the attitude throw you. He actually runs a foundation that gives scholarships to young people wanting a career in aviation, and he's kind of a war hero. That last part caught Nicola's attention. A hero? Henry nodded, this time more serious. Yeah, but he never talks about that stuff. Most people don't even know. One thing I can tell you, though, he doesn't let go of the people he cares about. Nicola mentally noted that last part. Doesn't let go of the people he cares about? Then, was that why he was getting so close to her? When the car pulled up in front of the hotel in the Jumeirah district, Nicola looked up. The massive glass facade was bathed in golden light. Marble steps at the entrance were framed by tall palm trees, and inside the lobby, a massive crystal chandelier glittered like a waterfall spilling from the ceiling. There was no sign of George. Nicola checked in, took her keycard, and headed upstairs. When she entered her room, the entire Dubai night stretched out before her, gold and blue lights blending into the sea like a living painting. She dropped her bag on the bed, slipped off her shoes, and leaned against the glass to take it all in. The questions in her head, though, were still waiting for answers. Steam from the hot shower slid down Nicola's shoulders, but the questions circling in her mind wouldn't dissolve. She'd only learned about Dubai at the last minute. Every outfit she'd packed was meant for New York's cold. There was no way she could walk around like this. Wrapping a towel around her hair, she opened the closet and nearly dropped the one around her body. 4 elegant summer dresses hung neatly on wooden hangers. On the shelf beside them, 2 evening gowns. Below, a pair of delicate, strappy heels and 2 pairs of sandals. She picked one up, turned it over, size 8. Her brows knit. How would they know that? Still caught in thought, she reached for the satin slip dress in soft blue. The fabric slid like water between her fingers. This was picked long before I ever got here, she murmured. Moments later, she slipped out of her black dress and into the pale blue one, stepped into the sandals, let her hair down. When she entered the hotel lobby, the gold lighting bathed her skin in a warm, radiant glow. As she passed the bar, Nicola's eyes caught the open doorway to the ground-floor restaurant. Inside, 4 men sat around a round table. At the center, cream linen suit, perfectly folded pocket square, slightly wavy hair, was George. Nicola turned toward the bar. She slipped onto a stool, just out of his line of sight, hidden behind one of the marble columns, ordered a martini. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass, while her eyes stayed locked on him. George was listening, calm, quiet, focused. He let others speak, but the room seemed to pivot around him. The easy smile, the subtle gestures, the quiet confidence that made people lean closer without even realizing it. Nothing like the man on the jet. This was an empire builder. His smile was measured, his posture perfect, and somehow the quiet magnetism of him seemed to pull the attention of every woman in the room. Nicola was seeing a side of him she hadn't before, and for reasons she didn't like to admit. Something about it, twisted deep in her stomach, this man was dangerously attractive. When Nicola returned to her room, a message lit up on her phone. "Be ready by 8. I assume you've found the dresses in the closet. Wear one of the evening gowns. We're having a formal dinner on the terrace. Meet me in the lobby. G." Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the screen. The dresses in the closet. So it was planned. Fingers paused, then chose a cherry red dress. Bold, elegant, impossible to ignore. She slipped it on, fabric hugging her just right. Left her hair loose, falling in soft waves, a sweep of mascara, a hint of gloss, the finishing touch, a trace of perfume at her neck. In the mirror, a stranger almost stared back, daring, radiant, and beneath it all, a single thought pulsed. What exactly am I walking into? At exactly 8 p.m., the sharp sound of heels echoed against the marble floor of the lobby. Nicola walked slowly, deliberately. The lobby glowed under warm golden light. Descending the grand staircase in her red dress, she spotted George, perched on a bar stool, drink in hand. The crystal glass caught the light as he lifted it slightly. And for a moment, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't move, didn't blink. But something in his gaze shifted. His breath caught, just barely. Still, his face held the same calm arrogance, like nothing surprised him, not even this. "You look beautiful," he said simply. There was no need for embellishment. His eyes said the rest. Nicola gave a polite nod and cleared her throat. "Thank you." George rose, finishing the last of his drink in one smooth motion. "Come on," he said. "They're waiting." They entered the elevator together. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy with everything left unsaid. Nicola kept her gaze forward, but finally spoke, her tone even. "What's been on my mind? It's the dresses. The shoes. They all fit perfectly. That can't be a coincidence." George's mouth curved into that familiar, almost infuriating smile. "I make it a point to know every detail about the people who work for me. Knowing a flight attendant's shoe size counts as one of those details?" He turned slightly to face her, his expression unreadable. "I told you, I didn't choose just anyone. I asked for you, Nicola." When the elevator doors opened, Nicola's heart was still racing. As they stepped out onto the terrace, Dubai's night skyline stretched around them, towering buildings glowing like jewels, the dark shimmer of the Arabian Gulf below. The air was warm, but a soft breeze made it bearable. At the round table, 4 people were already seated. Ahmed, a dignified man in a dark suit from the UAE, and his elegant wife, Layla. Next to them, British businessman Richard and his charismatic wife, Elizabeth. George walked forward with his usual quiet confidence, his hand gently guiding Nicola at the small of her back as they approached. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but commanding, May I introduce Nicola Hayes? There was a brief pause, a flicker of surprise around the table. Elizabeth was the first to speak, raising her glass with a warm smile. Well, this is a first. We've never seen George bring a woman to dinner. I have to say, it's a lovely surprise. A light flush crept across Nicola's cheeks, but George didn't say a word. He simply pulled out her chair. As she sat, he rested a hand briefly on her arm, a quiet gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone at the table. Once the conversation began, it quickly shifted toward business, new investments in aviation, profit margins, expansion plans in the Middle East market. Nicola mostly listened until Richard made a comment that pushed her to speak. "Women don't usually last long in cabin crew roles," he said casually. "Too demanding, I suppose." "It's not just about being demanding," Nicola replied, her voice calm but clear. "The industry still offers limited career paths for women, but with the right training and support, cabin crew can transition into pilot roles or move into operations." Ahmed raised his eyebrows, clearly intrigued. "You're in aviation yourself, Nicola?" Before she could answer, George stepped in smoothly. "Nicola's currently continuing her flight training. She also works at my company, Vance Line." The brief silence at the table tightened into a quiet tension inside Nicola. Why didn't he say it? Why didn't he mention, "I'm a flight attendant"? Still, she kept her professional smile intact. As the conversation moved on, George's fingers found hers on the table and held on. This time, he didn't let go. From the outside, it looked like a romantic gesture. Nicola's chest tightened. She glanced at him, but George's eyes never left the investors. "Is this a strategy? What exactly are you playing at, George Vance?" As dinner wound down, Elizabeth leaned closer. Her lips curved in a conspiratorial smile, her voice just low enough for Nicola alone. "Sweetheart, seeing how George treats you, it's honestly a relief. I always found him a bit arrogant with women. I even told my husband I wasn't sure we should go into business with him because of it. But now I see, with a smart woman like you next to him, he turns into someone else entirely." Nicola froze. She could only nod, a tightness building in her chest. "Am I just part of the mask he wears? Or does he really want me here?" When dinner ended, George and Nicola escorted the guest to the lobby. As they stepped off the elevator and walked together as a group, George's hand slid gently to Nicola's lower back. From the outside, it looked casual, intimate even. The kind of possessive touch that made sense between a couple. But inside, Nicola's chest tightened. This is just part of the act. Nothing more. She didn't pull away. It wasn't the right place for that. They said their goodbyes. The sleek black cars pulled away, and with them, George's hand. Once they were alone, he turned to her, the familiar smirk tugging at his lips. "You were brilliant tonight. Bringing you was absolutely the right call." Nicola's expression tensed. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the heat beneath it slipped through. "To be honest, Mr. Vance, it would have been nice to know I was part of tonight's performance ahead of time, and I still don't understand why you picked me specifically. I'll just say it. What you did tonight didn't exactly make me feel great." Inside the elevator, George leaned back against the metal wall, one hand in his pocket, eyes quietly fixed on Nicola. His calm demeanor only fueled her irritation. A tense silence filled the cabin. When they reached their floor, George finally spoke. "Let me walk you to your room." Nicola didn't argue. They stepped out into the corridor together. At her door, he took one step closer. Nicola found herself caught between him and the door. George rested his arm casually above her, eyes locked on hers. "Anyone could have been sitting beside me tonight," he said. "Believe me, there aren't many women who'd say no to flying to Dubai with me." He smiled faintly. "But that would have been boring." "You weren't. You challenged me, Nicola. You kept it unpredictable, and that was exciting." As he finished speaking, he leaned in, his lips so close, Nicola could feel his breath. Her heartbeat surged, but just when she thought he might kiss her, he pulled back, putting space between them again. "Get some rest, Nicola," he said softly. "We're heading out for a desert safari tomorrow. I'll be visiting a friend. Let's meet for breakfast at 9. He turned and walked away, unhurried. Nicola stayed by the door, her back pressed to it, taking slow, deep breaths, trying to calm the storm inside her chest. This arrogance, this ridiculous confidence. It's infuriating, Nicola thought. But then Henry's words echoed in the back of her mind. He's a good man, a decorated war pilot, funds scholarships for young people. How could all of those contradictions exist in one man? And not just any man, a man who looked like that. As the morning sun bathed Dubai in a golden glow, the hotel's glass facade shimmered like polished brass. Outside, a line of jeeps waited, engines rumbling, first signs of the desert adventure ahead. Nicola spotted him walking out of the lobby with his usual unhurried stride. George. He wore a crisp, white linen shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal sun-kissed skin beneath, loose white pants. Around his neck, a thin leather cord swayed with each step, and that red and white keffiyeh wrapped around his head. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like he belonged out there, in the desert. Nicola blinked once, exhaling softly. Does this man ever not look like he stepped out of a damn fashion campaign? She wore a light, white linen dress that danced around her knees in the breeze. The fabric fluttered with each step, and the open sandals on her feet added just the right touch of desert elegance. George's eyes landed on her briefly, just a second too long. Then a slow smile curved his lips. "You're ready, Miss Hayes? The desert might play hard to get today, but I have a feeling you'll manage." Nicola squinted, gesturing toward the scarf wrapped around his neck. "Tell me, Mr. Vance, that thing, style statement or actual function?" George leaned in with that familiar hint of mischief in his voice. "You'll find out. When the sand kicks up with the wind, that little accessory becomes the most valuable thing you've got." The convoy took off. Once the jeeps left the highway and dove into the open red dunes, Nicola felt her heartbeat quicken. The tires slid over the sand like water, then suddenly climbed a steep ridge, only to drop down the other side in seconds. Adrenaline, heat, and wind all blended into one dizzying rush. George sat beside her, one hand resting casually on the side grip, looking completely unbothered. Nicola tightened her grip and turned to him, breathless. "This feels like a roller coaster," George laughed. "That's the thrill of dune bashing. Hang tight, we're just getting started." As the dunes rolled past one after another, Nicola gazed out the window. An endless sea of golden sand stretched in soft waves, interrupted only by the occasional camel caravan or distant tent. The sun blazed overhead like a burning orb. After nearly an hour of driving, something unexpected rose on the horizon. A mansion, like an oasis in the middle of nowhere. Palm trees surrounded a man-made lake, fed by narrow water channels. The cool blue shimmer looked almost surreal against the deep red of the desert. When the jeeps pulled into the wide courtyard, Nicola's eyes widened. Massive wooden doors stood at the entrance, covered in intricate Arabic carvings. On either side, camels draped in colorful rugs stood tall, their handlers dressed in flowing white kaftans. Nicola leaned slightly toward George and whispered, "Is it normal to see camels just parked out front?" George tilted his head, that familiar smirk playing at his lips. "It's Damon's style. Mansion in the middle of the desert, decorative camels at the door. Dubai doesn't know how to do subtle." As soon as they stepped out of the jeep, a man in his 40s, dressed all in white with dark sunglasses, tan skin, and a strong build, was waiting to greet them at the door. He and George embraced like old friends. George! Finally, good to see you out here. George clapped him on the shoulder. Damon, my man, missed you. Then he gestured to the woman beside him. Nicola Hayes. Damon gave her a polite nod, eyes still on her. A guest as beautiful as an oasis in the desert. Welcome, Miss Hayes. Still looking at Nicola, he threw a grin George's way. I've got to say, George, it's good to finally see you show up with someone. I was getting real tired of all those solo trips. Nicola offered a soft smile, but her eyes were still scanning their surroundings. This place, it looks like a movie set. I can't believe it. You have your own lake? She let out a small laugh. It's surreal. As Damon began walking toward the entrance, he gently placed a hand on the small of her back. Nicola, this is my little slice of heaven. Just wait until you see the inside. I had a special table set just for you two. As they walked, Nicola could feel George's gaze linger a bit too long on Damon's hand at her back. She didn't look directly, but she noticed it. Just enough. As they stepped inside, Nicola was awestruck all over again. The mansion's high ceilings were adorned with massive chandeliers detailed in gold. The floors were draped with rich Persian rugs, and the walls were decorated with intricate, geometric arabesque patterns and large carved wooden panels. In each corner, towering brass lanterns glowed warmly, casting a soft amber light across the space. Through the tall windows, she caught a glimpse of the estate's centerpiece, a massive turquoise-colored artificial lake. Palm trees lined its edges, with wooden pergolas offering shade along the perimeter. Nicola thought to herself, this really is a private paradise, right in the middle of the desert. In the center of the large enclosed courtyard stood a beautifully carved low wooden table, overflowing with dishes in every color imaginable. Plates of vibrant meze, richly spiced aromas, and freshly baked bread created a sensory feast that made Nicola feel slightly lightheaded. Just then they were surrounded by 4 stunningly beautiful young Arab women, each carrying large copper trays with effortless grace. With delicate movements, they offered dates stuffed with almonds, frosty mint lemonade, and rosewater sherbet, served with soft cubes of Turkish delight. As George dropped himself onto the colorful floor cushions in the cool, shaded corner of the courtyard, he called out to one of the women with a casual familiarity, "Layla, I'll have my gawa plain, please, light on the cinnamon, heavy on the cardamom." Nicola was walking toward him, her thoughts quietly racing. How could one man have so many different sides? Leaving the hotel, he looked like a runway model. At dinner, he was the arrogant, polished billionaire, and now, barefoot, sunk into cushions like a child at home, he was someone entirely different. Relaxed, effortlessly grounded, completely in tune with his surroundings. George patted the cushion next to him with a grin. "Come sit with me," he said. "We're about to have a proper gawa moment." Nicola took a small sip of the gawa that had just been offered to her and immediately winced. "Oh my God, that's strong," she muttered, trying not to cough, then paused, curious. "But there's this exotic kick to it. What is that?" George smiled, clearly enjoying her reaction. "Cardamom and a touch of cinnamon." Nicola looked at him with a mix of surprise and admiration. "You really know this place. The culture, I mean." The way her eyes lingered didn't go unnoticed. George caught it. She noticed him noticing and quickly composed herself. "I've spent time in the region," he said, more evenly now. "Lived in Dubai for a year. Worked in Afghanistan, Syria." His gaze shifted, settling on the delicate glass cup in his hand. There was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression, just for a moment. Just then, Damon approached them with his usual burst of energy. "Nicola, how'd you like to ride a camel?" he asked, grinning. "Us men are going to talk a bit of business. No reason for you to get bored." George shot him a dry, amused look. "Nicola's a smart woman, Damon. I doubt she'd find us boring." Still seated, Nicola offered a graceful smile as she stood. "Well, I think I'll take the camel ride anyway. Pretty sure I won't get another chance like this in my life." George chuckled quietly, watching her with a glint of appreciation. Damon raised his brows. Fair enough, he said with mock seriousness. Then I'll have them bring out my finest camel. Only the best for you. The large, ornately decorated camel was led to the front of the courtyard. Its back was draped with colourful rugs and tassels that swayed with every step. Damon turned to Nicola with a grin, offering his hand. Don't worry, she's as gentle as they come. A handler guided the camel to kneel. Nicola hesitated just a moment before stepping up, using the folded legs like a staircase. As she settled onto the saddle, the sudden height made her stomach flutter. Across the courtyard, George stood with his hands in his pockets, watching intently. There was a tightness to his jaw, barely noticeable, but it was there. Hold on tight, Nicola, Damon called with a teasing laugh. The first lift's a bit of a jolt. The camel rose in one sudden, lurching motion. Nicola yelped, sliding forward slightly before steadying herself. She tried to laugh it off and shouted, "Oh my God, this is so high!" The camel moved with slow, heavy steps around the courtyard, the wind sweeping sand into gentle waves around them. Nicola had let herself relax for just a moment, taking in the surreal beauty of the desert setting, until the camel suddenly tossed its head and stumbled slightly. She gasped. Thrown off balance, she reached for the reins, but it all happened too fast. Her fingers slipped, and in a blink she was falling, hard. The sand softened the impact, but not enough. Her breath caught in her throat as she hit the ground. For a moment, everything blurred. Then she heard it. George's voice, sharp and panicked. "Nicola!" In the next instant, he was there, dropping to his knees beside her, the sun blazing behind him like a halo. His face, those sharp green eyes, that was the first thing she saw when she opened hers. He gently swept the hair from her face, leaning close. "Are you okay? Can you move?" His voice was low, but tight with worry. One hand was already checking her legs, testing for reflexes. Behind them, Damon's voice called out, "She's fine, it's okay." But to Nicola, it was barely noise. All she could focus on was George's face, inches from hers. "Nicola, are you okay? Does anything hurt? You didn't hit your head, did you?" Nicola blinked, dazed, as she opened her eyes. There was a scrape on her knee, a little sting, but not enough to explain the pounding in her chest. That was all George, the panic in his face, his voice rough and low, edged with fear. I think I'm okay," she whispered, just startled. George snapped his head toward Damon, his tone sharp and furious. "What the hell were you thinking? This isn't a damn amusement ride. She could have been seriously hurt." Damon lifted his hands in mock surrender, but there was a flicker of calculation in his eyes. "Relax, George. You're overreacting. She looks fine to me." George didn't answer. His hand stayed on Nicola's back as he helped her sit up, then gently lifted her to her feet, fingers steady at her waist. Damon was watching closely, and he didn't miss the way George's hand lingered a little too long, or the way Nicola leaned into him just slightly. Something unspoken passed between them, and Damon caught it. All of it. After a while, when George stepped away for a moment, Damon leaned in toward Nicola, his voice low and steady. "Nicola, don't let his reactions scare you. George can be a little overprotective." Nicola frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean by that?" Damon's expression shifted, something more serious behind his easy demeanor. "There was a woman once," he said quietly, "someone he cared about. He lost her, and he's never forgiven himself for not protecting her. That's why he's the way he is. When he cares, he holds on tight." Nicola turned to Damon, eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you talking about Lana?" Damon blinked, clearly surprised. "So, you do know?" He sighed, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, back in Afghanistan. Her plane went down. George did everything he could to save her, but he was too late." Nicola's voice was barely a whisper. "Lana, she was a pilot? A combat pilot?" Damon nodded. "She was. Tough as hell too. Don't let George's attitude throw you off. He's a good man. He just hasn't let anyone get close in a long time. Then, with a small smile, which is why seeing you here by his side is honestly kind of refreshing. Nicola raised an eyebrow, still trying to process everything, when Damon added with a grin, "Look at you two, he's even spending his birthday with you." Nicola blinked in shock. "His birthday? Today? I didn't know." Damon chuckled. "Yeah, he turns 38 today. We've been celebrating it together for the past 12 years. At that exact moment, George was walking toward them with his usual serious expression. "Talking about birthdays again, Damon," he muttered, frowning. "You know I hate that stuff." "Of course you do," Damon said, flashing a teasing grin. "That's why we've been celebrating it the same way, in this same place, every single year, right?" As Nicola sipped her rose sherbet, lounging on the floor cushions, her thoughts were spinning. For 2 days, everyone kept saying the same thing. "George is a good man." But Nicola had started piecing the truth together on her own. "You're the son of an insanely wealthy family. You didn't even need to work, and yet you chose to become a combat pilot. You fought in a war with the woman you loved, and you lost her. You tattooed the coordinates of where you lost her on your skin, so you'd never forget that pain, that helplessness. And when it was all over, you walked away from that life and took over the family company. Now, you fund scholarships for young people who dream of flying." Her gaze lifted. There he was, coming toward her, white linen shirt brushing against his bronze skin, long sandy hair catching in the warm desert breeze. Those sharp, unreadable eyes fixed on her, every step measured, every movement calm but powerful. Nicola's lips parted ever so slightly. That arrogant George Vance. Was he starting to get under her skin, or worse? Was he starting to take her breath away? As the sun slowly set, the courtyard of the estate took on a whole new look. Large lanterns placed over the sand glowed softly, and the fires near the lake cast orange reflections on the water's surface. Delicate Arabic music filled the air, with the sounds of the oud and darbuka carrying through the night. Spices drifted in from a distance, slow-cooked lamb, saffron rice, grilled fish, roasted vegetables. Huge copper trays were laid out with dates, baklava, figs, and rose sherbet. Damon spread his arms proudly. "This is how desert nights are meant to be lived." As Nicola sat at the low table, set over colourful rugs, she looked up at the sky. The stars were so bright in the desert darkness, it felt like she could reach out and touch them. As the night went on, the courtyard took on an entirely different vibe. By the candle-lit edge of the lake, a belly dancer moved fluidly to the rhythm of the oud and darbuka. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, mixed with something like sweet, spicy perfume. Nicola had started off sitting a bit stiffly, keeping her distance. But after Damon had someone bring her a camel milk cocktail, followed by a saffron mojito, her head began to spin just a little. The exotic flavors left a bittersweet aftertaste, and she could feel her muscles slowly relax. The woman who'd been tense beside George just a few hours ago now found herself softening without even noticing. George's deep laughter, Damon's booming jokes, the ebb and flow of the music, all around her, it felt like another world. Sometimes George would lean in and whisper something to her, or let his hand brush her shoulder or touch her fingers as he passed her glass. Each little gesture hit harder than it probably should have, especially with the drinks in her system. When the music picked up, a dancer in shimmering silk stepped onto the small stage. Every jingle from her golden belt rang out as she moved. Graceful, mesmerizing. Damon leaned toward George with a grin and nudged him. "Man, I haven't seen you this relaxed in years." George didn't answer. He just raised his glass and looked at Nicola. There was no smirk, no smugness, just this strange softness in his eyes. Nicola's heart skipped. Then George reached for her hand. She hesitated for half a second, but this time she didn't pull away. His fingers were warm around hers, and somehow the feeling spun her faster than the music ever could. After a while, Damon raised his voice. "I've had your rooms prepared. "You're staying here tonight." Nicola stiffened instantly. The sherbet glass in her hand trembled. She turned her head, eyes locking on George. Something about Damon's words triggered a strange wave of panic inside her. George slowly stood up from his seat. His eyes were on Damon, voice calm but firm. "Damon, get Nicola a separate room." There was a beat of silence in the courtyard. Damon raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Separate room? Did I misread something here?" George didn't flinch, his gaze steady. "Separate room, please." Damon tilted his head, playing clueless, but didn't push further. "Of course," he said with a short grin. Nicola was left sitting with a mix of surprise, relief and confusion twisting inside her. George, stepping in like that, so clear, so protective, made her feel oddly safe and completely thrown off. When she walked into her room, her breath caught. The high, domed ceiling towered over a massive bed draped with sheer white canopies. The silk bedding was dusted with fresh rose petals. On the pillows lay carefully folded sleepwear, a soft bustier top and a slitted, loose, exotic-style bottom. Nicola ran her fingers over the silky fabric of the pants. "Who thought of this?" she whispered to herself. Everything about this felt like stepping into a dream. There was a large jacuzzi in the room. Eagerly, she sank into the warm bubbles, closed her eyes, and let herself relax. But George kept showing up in her mind, the way he looked back in the desert, the way he watched her at dinner. The heat of the water only made those thoughts swirl harder inside her. After the bath, she slipped into the sleepwear. The fabric brushing against her skin made her feel like someone else entirely. Her job had taken her around the world. She'd seen places, but this part of Dubai and George felt almost hypnotic. She tried to sleep. Couldn't. Her heart kept racing. Eventually she got up, padded across the room, and pulled the curtain aside. She slid open the glass door that led to the terrace, taking a few quiet steps toward the flowers where the air was thick with their scent. Just beyond, the lake stretched out before her. Moonlight spilled across the turquoise surface, palm trees casting soft, wavering shadows across the water. And there, in the distance, standing beneath the dim light, dressed in white, George. He was walking slowly along the edge of the lake, phone to his ear. The white linen shirt he wore seemed to glow under the soft shadows of the night. Nicola's eyes were locked on him. "Don't stare," she told herself, but she couldn't look away. Then, all at once, he lifted his head and his eyes found hers, still speaking into the phone, but his eyes, his green eyes, were on her. Nicola's throat went dry. She tried to look away, but couldn't. Mesmerized, her eyes refused to leave his. He ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, stood still for a beat, and he started walking toward her. Nicola's pulse spiked. Every step he took closed the distance with intention. She thought about turning back into her room, but her feet didn't move. The warm desert breeze danced with the sheer curtains, tugging at her silk bustier, wrapping around the slit in her loose pants, making everything feel lighter, barer, more exposed. He was getting closer. Nicola's chest rose and fell, faster now, her breath catching at the edge of a whisper. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, betraying the restless urge to reach for him. Their eyes locked, unyielding, hungry, daring the other to break first. Nicola felt her lips part slightly, her body still. George didn't rush, but there was something inevitable in the way he approached her. He stepped onto the terrace. Now, they were only one breath apart. No words, but everything had already been said. Only the sound of their hearts, beating in the silence between them. George's hand lifted slowly. His fingertips slipped into her hair, threading gently through the strands. Nicola wanted to look away, needed to, but she couldn't. His eyes were fire, burning through her defenses. She felt completely exposed. His hands drifted from her hair to her bare shoulders, then lower, just above the line of her silk bustier, onto skin that suddenly felt too hot, too sensitive. Her breath caught in her throat. His touch wasn't rushed, but it was deliberate and heavy with something she didn't dare name. Then it happened. George grabbed her by the waist, pulled her against him, his strength undeniable, possessive. His lips crashed onto hers in a kiss that was fast, fierce, full of heat. Nicola's mind blanked. Fear, surprise, and desire all surged at once. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was raw, intense, like something he'd been holding back for years and finally couldn't contain any longer. When he pulled her tighter against his chest, Nicola's breath hitched. A second later, George swept her into his arms. No hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world, something he'd been waiting years to do. He carried her across the terrace and into the room, toward the bed that waited behind a veil of white silk. Nicola rested her head against his neck, trying to calm the wild rhythm of her heartbeat, but deep down, she knew his touch, his nearness. She was already in too deep to run. The bed stood still, like a secret hidden behind gauze and moonlight. She could feel his chest rising beneath her cheek, his breath uneven. They still didn't say a word. Words would have been useless. Only their eyes spoke, and what passed between them in that look was fire. A spark that didn't need permission to burn. When George's lips found hers again, the kiss deepened, hungrier, wetter, more consuming. Nicola's fingers locked around his waist as if her body had made the choice before her mind could catch up. Their breath tangled in broken gasps, filling the dimly lit room. Behind the veil of sheer curtains, shadows moved in rhythm. She felt his strength pressing against her, yet every touch carried an unexpected tenderness. A kiss hidden in her hair, fingers drifting down the curve of her neck, the way he watched every reaction, answering each one with equal intensity. The air thickened with the soft rise of moans, a language louder than words. Her back arched against silk sheets, his breath hot at her ear, time dissolving into nothing but pounding hearts and wet, desperate kisses. Nicola felt both vulnerable and safe, caught between the force of him and the surprising gentleness, a storm that was terrifying and mesmerizing all at once. The canopy cast their shadows onto the walls, two bodies moving as one. Every gasp, every trembling sound shattered the silence, speaking truths words never could. When Nicola woke up, the room was wrapped in soft, morning light. Her body, still tangled in white curtains, ached with a pleasant soreness she wasn't used to. Traces of his kisses still lingered on her lips, the imprint of his hands burned into her skin. With her eyes closed, flashes from the night before played through her mind, hours of raw passion again and again. He'd been rough and tender, wild and careful, and in the end, without saying a word, he'd pulled her against his chest and held her until morning. But now, the space beside her was empty. The warmth on the pillow was already long gone. Nicola stared at the bed for a few seconds, trying to quiet the storm inside her. Then she got dressed, one slow, steady breath at a time. As she walked toward the courtyard, Nicola heard laughter. In the covered patio, George and Damon sat side by side in front of a lavish breakfast spread, deep in cheerful conversation. George popped a fig into his mouth and laughed, then his eyes landed on Nicola. That look. It still carried the heat of the night before, the hunger that hadn't fully faded. Her knees wobbled without warning. Damon waved with a warm smile. "Good morning, beautiful Nicola. Come, have breakfast with us before you head out." George didn't say a word. He just placed his hand on the cushion beside him, silently asking her to sit. Nicola hesitated, heart pounding, and slowly lowered herself down. The table was covered in everything imaginable: honey, dates, pastries, fresh cheeses, spiced flatbread. Damon ate with gusto, talking about business, investments, new opportunities. Nicola nodded as if listening, but all she could focus on was George's hand, slipping beneath her white dress under the table, resting boldly against her thigh. When Nicola looked at him, George met her eyes with a calm, unrushed, almost arrogant gaze, piercing and unreadable. Without breaking eye contact, he picked up a piece of fig and slowly raised it to her lips. Nicola, almost involuntarily, parted her mouth and let him feed it to her. The tension at the table thickened like steam. Damon caught the moment, raised an eyebrow, then laughed out loud. "Man, it's getting real hot out here, feels like fire." The table went silent for a beat. Nicola's heart pounded in her chest as George just kept looking at her, saying nothing, doing nothing else, just watching, and that alone was enough to make the air feel electric. Nicola couldn't even follow the conversation anymore. Her head was spinning with 1,000 thoughts. Last night had been fire, raw and consuming, but not a single word had followed, not a whisper, not the kind of tender touch or morning embrace that tells you it meant something more. Did he truly see her, or had she just played her part again? The uncertainty gnawed at her, twisting with every stolen glance. After a while, they said their goodbyes and hit the road again. This time, instead of jeeps, ATVs were lined up and ready. Nicola wrapped her head with a shemmer to shield herself from the sun, and more than once she leaned into George's back, her arms around his waist, breathing him in as they sped through the desert. There was no denying it anymore. She was hopelessly, stupidly in love with him. They rode in silence, the roar of the engine echoing across the dunes, the vibration humming through her body. But to Nicola, that silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, charged with everything they didn't need to say. Eventually, they reached the meeting point beyond the dunes, where the jeeps were waiting. They parked the ATVs, and as Nicola climbed into the vehicle, she kept looking at George. He looked at her, and this time said just one thing. "You okay?" Nicola nodded. There were 100 things she could have said, but none of them made it past her lips. The silence between them wasn't cold. It was heavy with meaning. Once they were back on the road, George pulled out his phone. His voice was sharp, business-like, clipped, all authority, but his hand never left Nicola's body. What started as a casual touch slowly drifted possessively to her thigh, then her hip. Nicola didn't even dare to breathe. She knew now. There was no escaping this man's gravity. When they arrived at the hotel, George slipped his arm lightly around Nicola's waist as he stepped out of the car, like it was nothing, like last night had never happened. His voice was deep but casual, his eyes avoiding hers. "Jet leaves in 2 hours. Get ready. Head to the plane with Henry. There's something I need to take care of. I'll catch up." Nicola nodded. She didn't have the strength to ask questions. In that moment, she felt powerless, like a puppet ready to move however he pulled the strings. Her heart wanted to protest, but her lips stayed silent. Back in her room, she packed quietly. As she folded her clothes into her suitcase, only one thought kept echoing in her mind. Was last night even real, or just a dream? By the time Nicola reached the jet with Henry, there were only minutes left before takeoff, but George was nowhere in sight. She paced the cabin, trying to quiet the storm building in her chest. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She stepped into the cockpit. "Henry, Mr. Vance still isn't here." The captain tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. "We just got word. Mr. Vance won't be joining the flight. We're heading straight back to New York." Something ice-cold pierced through Nicola's chest. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then she turned, walked back into the cabin. Her hands gripped the edge of the mirror. In the reflection, she saw the uniform, the neat navy jacket, the tight bun, the polished makeup. But her eyes were red, and her soul felt shattered. So, what the hell was the last 2 days? No answer came. The plane took off. For the next 13 hours, the cabin was quiet. Empty. Nicola sat alone, wrapped in the silence. Every time she refilled a coffee, every step she took down the aisle, her mind wandered back to him. To the scent of him in the desert, the way he walked toward her on the terrace, the heat of his touch beneath that curtain of silk. She relived every second. But the truth was simple. He wasn't there. Right before landing, Henry walked up and gave her shoulder a gentle pat. "You okay, Nicola?" She nodded with a forced smile. If she tried to speak, she knew she'd break. Nicola went home. She had no flight scheduled for days. She sat by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Her phone never left her hand. Maybe he'd call, maybe a message. But the screen stayed dark. No notifications. Nothing. The sadness and hurt inside her slowly twisted into disappointment, then frustration, then quiet, simmering anger. But no matter how furious she got, every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image. George Vance, in white linen, wind in his hair, walking toward her across the desert. That look in his eyes, desire, fire, complete control. She couldn't unsee it. Nicola buried her face in her hands. How did I let this happen? How did I let that arrogant man get under my skin, touch me, make me feel I'm not this woman? I don't lose control. I don't get used. And yet, I let him. The next morning, Nicola was slinging her bag over her shoulder, about to head out for her flight, when she noticed a white envelope on the doorstep. There was a familiar logo stamped on the corner, Vance Flight Academy. Her heart stuttered as she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a thick piece of paper printed with an official letterhead, Ms. Nicola Hayes, you have been accepted into the pilot training program at Vance Flight Academy on a full scholarship. Your current cabin crew position and salary with our airline will remain active throughout your training. Nicola stared at the letter, unable to breathe. The words blurred. Her fingers trembled. What? How? Money had always been the issue. Her goal was to rise through the airline, from cabin crew to ground operations management. Pilot school? That had been a dream when she was 23. From 5 years ago, she'd buried it, said goodbye to it, and now, suddenly, it was standing right in front of her. Nicola's face flushed. Her jaw tightened. George! She realized it instantly. He knew her past. He hadn't forgotten her dream of becoming a pilot. He could access every detail. She had already seen that. But this? Was this a gesture, or was it payment for 2 nights of heat and closeness? A cold stab hit her chest. Her lips trembled. You can't just throw money at me. You can't give me a scholarship like it's the price for what we did. Her eyes burned with fury. For a moment she felt humiliated. Like in his eyes, she'd been nothing more than a 2 days escort. This scholarship, this piece of paper, was it his receipt? She crumpled the document in her hand. Her eyes welled up, but it wasn't sadness this time. It was pure, blinding rage. How could you do this to me, George Vance? The voice inside her, deep and raw, was torn between heartbreak, anger, and a dangerous desire she still couldn't shake. Nicola's heels echoed sharply against the marble floor of Vance Towers. She walked straight through the high-ceilinged lobby and headed up to the executive floor. Her heart was pounding like a drum. Through the glass walls, the Manhattan skyline shimmered against the grey sky. The receptionist looked up. May I help you? I need to see Mr. Vance. The woman gave a polite smile. Do you have an appointment? No, but he'll want to see me. Tell him Nicola Hayes is here waiting. There was a beat of hesitation before the receptionist glanced toward the office and disappeared through the door. Nicola stood there, clutching the wrinkled envelope in her hand, the silence pressing heavier with each second. Finally, the receptionist returned. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance isn't available. He's in a meeting." Nicola's eyes filled instantly. She bit her lip, swallowing hard as a knot formed in her throat. For a moment, she just stood there, silent. Then, slowly, she began tearing the envelope into small pieces, one after another. The shredded paper slipped through her fingers to the floor like fragments of broken pride. She handed the scraps to the receptionist. "Then please, give him my message like this." Her voice held quiet devastation. She turned around and walked out, head down, blinking hard to hold back tears. Behind the glass partition to the side of the office, George was standing still. Nicola hadn't seen him, but he'd seen everything, watched it all. His fingers curled into fists in his pockets. He couldn't take his eyes off her as her silhouette disappeared down the hallway. Just then, a hand touched his shoulder. "George," it was Amelia. Her hair perfectly pulled back, her sharp eyes locked on her brother. "You don't treat a woman like that." George didn't turn. His gaze was still fixed on the door. "You don't understand, Amelia. This is better. Trust me." Her voice was calm but unwavering. "We both know why you're pushing her away. But doing it like this, running, leaving her humiliated, you're not solving anything." George took a deep breath, his jaw clenched tight. It wasn't anything serious. Amelia let out a short, bitter laugh. "Really? Is that what we're going with now?" She shook her head. "Don't insult me, George. I saw the way you looked at her, the way you couldn't take your eyes off her when she walked into the lobby. Your eyes followed her until she was gone. You brought her all the way to Damon's, spent the night with her, and she meant nothing to you." Silence. Amelia narrowed her eyes, studying his face. "If you actually believe that, George, then you're lying to yourself." George's eyes were still fixed on the hallway, on the place where Nicola had disappeared. The corner of his mouth twitched, but he said nothing. Nicola wasn't with Vance Air anymore. After everything that happened 6 months ago, she had quit, pulled herself together, and started fresh with another international airline. The uniform was different now, and so were the memories. But on every flight, right before takeoff, her mind would drift back to that night in Dubai, those days in the desert, and the chaos George had left behind. That day's flight was headed to London. Business class was full, passengers were all seated, and final preparations were underway. Nicola walked down the aisle with her usual calm, professional air, doing her last checks. One passenger on the front row still hadn't fastened his seatbelt, phone out, totally oblivious. Nicola, staying fully in work mode, walked up to him with firm, precise steps. The silhouette from behind looked ordinary. "Sir, I need you to turn off your phone and fasten your seatbelt," she said clearly, no nonsense in her tone. When the man looked up, Nicola froze. Sitting in front of her was George Vance, the man she hadn't seen in 6 months, and those smug eyes of his still exactly the same. George lifted his head with that trademark cocky smirk tugging at his lips. "Well, aren't you by the book?" he said lazily. "I've never been great with seatbelts. Maybe you could help me out?" Nicola's eyes flared with anger, jaw tightened. She swallowed hard, keeping her composure, refusing to break character. Without a word, she bent down, grabbed the seatbelt, and snapped it into place, tight enough to knock the breath out of him. Nearby passengers froze, startled by the sudden, deliberate force behind her movements. "Please turn off your phone too, sir," Nicola said, her voice cool as ice. George turned to the other passengers with a grin. "You see that? Super strict around here, maybe a little too strict, and rough, don't you think?" There were a few chuckles and murmurs. Nicola gave a tight, professional smile and replied calmly, "Sir, these rules are for your safety." Just as she turned to walk away, George called out, "A cold champagne, please, but brought by you. Consider it as an apology. For proving seatbelts can be used as weapons." Nicola drew in a steady breath, her heels clicking with calm precision as she returned 2 minutes later. She set the glass down with delicate grace, then tilted it, just enough for the champagne to cascade, cold and merciless, across his crisp shirt and straight into his lap. The passengers gasped. George leaned back in his seat, arms spread wide, looking around theatrically with his shirt soaked. "Told you, I won't be flying this airline again. Vance Line Air always offers far better service." That was it. Nicola had enough. She turned back, heels clicking, fire in her eyes. "I can't speak for the crew at Vance Air, but I do know the owner's an arrogant, selfish man who uses people. And honestly, I highly recommend never flying with a man like that running the show." Every pair of eyes in business class was now locked on them. The silence had turned the cabin into a stage. The elderly man in the next seat, who'd been casually reading his newspaper moments ago, quietly folded it, set it aside, and leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. No way he was missing this. A middle-aged woman up front, who had been whispering a nervous prayer during takeoff prep, now looked like she'd forgotten all about her fear of flying. She craned her neck into the aisle, eyes wide, completely absorbed in the drama unfolding before her. George slid the buckle free and stood, every movement deliberate, controlled. As he took a step toward her, his lips curved. "Tell me, Miss Hayes, do the rules say a man can't admire his flight attendant up close?" Nicola's chest rose and fell fast. Her heart was pounding under the buttons of her uniform, but her voice came out firm and steady. "Sir, you're gonna need to follow the rules. Please, take your seat." George's eyes never left hers. There was a smirk on his lips, but something deeper, hotter, burned in his gaze. He tilted his head, speaking low but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You ever notice how every time we cross paths, it turns into this?" Nicola didn't flinch. Her stare was sharp as steel. "This isn't a scene, George. This is an aircraft, and I'm the senior flight attendant in charge." Suddenly, in one swift move, George reached for her waist. Nicola didn't even have time to react. He pulled her in, flush against his chest, and before she could catch her breath, his mouth crashed onto hers. Right then, the plane lifted off the tarmac. As the nose tilted up, the cabin's gravity shifted. Unbuckled passengers slid back slightly in their seats. Nicola and George, they weren't so lucky. They went tumbling, straight to the floor. Nicola landed right on top of him, her palms flat against his chest. The whole fuselage hummed with the roar of takeoff, but George was still kissing her, like nothing else in the world mattered, like he'd been holding that kiss in for 6 long months. Heads were now popping up from nearby seats like curious meerkats. Nicola tried to push him off, breathless and flustered, but George leaned in, his voice low, rough, and aimed straight at her ear. "Nicola, listen to me." He paused, just one beat, just enough to make her look at him. "I missed you every damn day for 6 months, and I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. I was a coward. Please, forgive me." The plane was still climbing, engine roar mixing with the pounding of 2 racing hearts. Nicola, pinned beneath him, could still feel the heat of his kiss on her lips, but her eyes were fixed on his, and for the first time, that cocky, untouchable man. He looked broken, raw, vulnerable, but still arrogant in some kind of way. Right next to them, a Gen Z guy had his phone out, recording like his life depended on it. "Yo, this is what I call a real takeoff position." 2 rows back, a stiff corporate type dabbed his coffee-soaked shirt, grumbling, "What is this? Love and more instead of miles and more." The praying lady from earlier totally forgot her fear of flying. She elbowed the guy next to her. "Shh! Shh, look at this. Even Hollywood doesn't do it this well. Nicola scrambled off George, trying to fix her uniform. Her hair was a mess, her breath short. George reached up a hand like, "Need a lift?" She turned her back to him, eyes scanning the passengers, still staring at them, wide-eyed in stunned silence. She drew a sharp breath, composed herself, then turned with a tight smile and a clear voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, you can enjoy romantic comedies from the comfort of your seat screens. This live show is officially over." A round of applause broke out. Some whistled. Just as Nicola turned to walk away, George caught her by the arm and spun her back to him. "You're right. I disappeared. I tried to make a gesture. It came out wrong." Nicola's eyes narrowed, voice sharp as a blade. "A gesture? Really? Making a woman feel like an escort, then mailing her a scholarship like it was some kind of payment. That's your idea of a gesture. You're a pompous, arrogant rich boy, George Vance." An older woman in the front row clutched her chest and gasped, "Oh my God! You tell him, honey. Don't let any man treat you like that." The man sitting next to her leaned over with a groan. "Oh, please, ma'am, don't be so dramatic. You women never get how thoughtful we men can actually be. It's obvious she means something to the guy." George dropped his gaze to the floor, then slowly lifted it, locking eyes with Nicola. "I was scared, okay? I ran on purpose. I thought getting close to you would be a mistake." George raked both hands through his hair, pushing it back as if he could shove away the memory with it. His shoulders sagged, the movement raw, almost desperate. When he finally spoke, his voice was uneven. "There was someone, years ago, someone I loved, and she's gone, because of me." The words hung heavy in the air, each one sounding like it cost him to say. He drew in a breath, steadier this time, and when his eyes lifted to Nicola, there was no armor left. "Since then, I've kept everyone out, no one close, no one until you. I didn't want anyone in my life, not until you." Nicola's eyes welled up, her breath shallow, yet the anger still flickered beneath the surface. George took a step closer, his tone more intense now. "Everything that happened in Dubai, on that jet, it was real, Nicola. I left that day because I knew, if I didn't, I'd never be able to walk away again." He smiled faintly, eyes still locked on hers. "I've never met a woman like you. Smart, grounded, fearless, and so goddamn beautiful, it's unreal." Just then, the man in the next row gave Nicola an obvious slow once-over. George immediately stepped in front of her and said, firm but calm, "Mind taking your eyes off my girlfriend?" "Girlfriend? Excuse me? I'm not your girlfriend," Nicola snapped, her voice sharp and furious. "Yes, you are," George said, pulling her closer, "and I'm not letting you out of my sight, not for one more second." His lips barely left hers as he whispered, "It's over, Nicola. There's no running from me now." As the cabin filled with applause and whistles, George wrapped his arms tighter around her waist. Nicola rested her head against his chest, her eyes still wet, but for the first time her heart felt calm. George leaned down, his breath warm at her ear. "Scream, yell, curse me out all you want. But from now on, every flight, every takeoff, every landing, you'll be with me." Nicola closed her eyes. A soft, tired but honest smile tugged at her lips. She finally understood. There was nowhere left to run. And when George kissed her again, it wasn't one-sided anymore. Just then, a squeal erupted from the back of the cabin. "Oh my God, is that George Vance? Like the actual owner of Vance Line Airlines?" The girl clutched her phone like she'd just spotted a pop star. A few rows down, the older woman who'd been muttering prayers earlier now fanned herself dramatically with the safety card. "Well, I don't know about you people, but from now on, I'm only flying Vance Line. I mean, if this is the kind of in-flight entertainment they offer." The elderly man across the aisle folded his newspaper with a grin and leaned toward her. "In that case, ma'am, may I offer to be your seatmate on your next flight?" She batted her lashes and adjusted her brooch with mock elegance. Only if you promise to create this level of turbulence, darling. The cabin roared with laughter. The sky was painted in strokes of gold and crimson, the last light of sunset casting a warm glow over the clouds. The Vance Line private jet cruised high above the world. In the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, sat Captain Nicola Vance. Her eyes sparkled with the quiet fire of a dream once too far to touch, now fully, beautifully real. Beside her in the co-pilot seat, George watched her in silence. No words were needed. The look in his eyes said it all. You did it. In the rear cabin, Henry sat calmly flipping through a thick novel, the ever-patient guardian of this now very personal flight. From the center of the jet came a burst of giggles. Little Skylar, their 4-year daughter, was waving a toy airplane and calling toward the cockpit. "Mom, how much longer? Can I ride a camel when we get to Dubai?" Nicola glanced back with a smile, catching George's amused nod. Her voice was full of warmth and pride. "Of course, Miss Skylar Vance, a camel ride and the zoo." Skylar erupted in laughter, and George leaned over, gently taking Nicola's hand in his. They sat in quiet for a moment, holding each other in a peace they had once thought impossible, because now, in the very skies that had once brought them together, they were flying their own story. The heartbreak, the misunderstandings, the almosts, all behind them now. Nicola was at the controls, George was right beside her. And, in the back, sat their greatest miracle, Skylar. The sky no longer just charted their path. It carried their fate. Thank you for staying till the end. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel, and if this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe. It means the world to me.